Okay, everyone, welcome to this session on how to create a paperless law office. My name is Ernie Svensson. I will be presenting the session today. A little bit about my background. I practiced law for 27 years, most of it at a large firm, and that's kind of where I started to learn about how to use these tools that I'm going to talk to you about today and about how to be paperless and so forth. And it was after about 20 years with that firm that I decided to go out on my own, and I was able to do that very easily, largely because I had all of my key documents scanned and I knew how to practice law pretty much as a paperless lawyer, and so it made my transition a lot easier. I started a company called paperlesschase.com, which is focused on helping lawyers figure out how to create paperless law practices and how to use technology effectively to be more efficient, save money, save time, and do a better job for their clients. So let's get started by talking about the problem. The problem being that we have paper. So it's not all kinds of paper that are the problem necessarily, like legal pads are nice and useful, we can write on them. So this is not the kind of paper really that creates a problem. And we tend to take paper and put it in stacks and put binders on it or staple it together. And this is a small stack of paper. This is also not really a big problem in most law offices, or really any office. This also is not really a big problem. These papers are kind of maybe not perfectly organized, but they're in folders, and so they're grouped together, and obviously they're organized in some way. This is where we start to get into the problem, is that when we take these papers and we don't manage them carefully, they start to look like this on someone's desk, and now we're starting to see the beginnings of the problem. Here the problem's gotten a lot worse. These are papers that are pretty disheveled, and this fellow's going to have a hard time moving them around. This fellow is surrounded by paper. He's apparently got a computer screen hiding over there to his right, or to his left, our right, and he's got binders and stacks of paper, and he's working on paper. So he's an unhappy camper. So what is the cause of this problem of paper accumulating and creating unsightly bundles, unsightly stacks? What is the cause of this problem that we start to see? In one sense, we could say that the start of the problem was mechanical when the printing press was invented, because before the printing press, it was very hard to create bound volumes or to create paper documents, and you had to have monks and scribes creating them. But once the printing press got created, the possibility arose that people could mass produce paper documents. And it took a while for them to do this and for this to scale, but this was the beginning of the problem, but not really that big of a problem for us. This also could be said to be part of the problem because it was easier to mass produce papers. With this was sort of a mini printing press, but it was mechanical, and so each time you wanted to create a letter, you had to push a button, it would strike the key, and if you pushed too closely together, they would jam, and then you'd have to slow down. So it was a mechanical printing press, if you will, a typewriter, but it was still hard to crank out a lot of paper using one of those devices. It's with the advent of the modern personal computer that the problem really starts to kick in, because with a personal computer, you can very easily create a lot of documents, you can copy and paste from them, you can send them around quickly to people, and so this is the beginning of the real problem. But the real problem is here. It's when these documents that are created on computers and other digital devices get printed out. Because when they get printed out, that's when you create paper, and once you create paper, you have to organize it, move it around, and take care of it. So it's the low-cost personal printer that really was the dawn of the problem, and that really started to kick in the late 80s, early 90s. So it's really been in the last 20 years or so that paper production has really kicked in and taken off. And of course, the problem with these printers is, while it's sophisticated technology, it still isn't very reliable. And you see a lot of printers jamming and the paper coming out in a funky way that has, requires you to put it back together. So printers are not necessarily our friends. So what is the solution to this problem where paper makes us less organized, where these printers create a lot of paper for us to organize, and we kind of are caught behind this paper overload that we have to deal with. What is the solution to this problem? And the solution is to recognize that we live in a digital world. We're creating all of these documents digitally, and what we're doing is we're kind of going against the grain when we're printing out too many of them and managing them as paper as opposed to managing them as digital files. So the solution really is to gravitate towards a paperless office, and I'm using the word gravitate advisedly and carefully. So today what we're going to talk about is how do you do that? How do you create a paperless law office? And I would say it breaks down into 3 phases. The first phase, which most lawyers who are thinking about this are in, is they start thinking, well, maybe I should create a paperless law office. I've heard of this paperless law office. What's this all about? How would I do it? What would be the benefits? What kind of problems would I face? What will it cost? And are there any ethics issues? Those are the kinds of things that lawyers typically think about as they're contemplating whether to create a paperless law office. Then you get to the phase where they say, okay, I'm convinced there's some good benefits. It's not going to cost that much. And I understand what the ethics issues are, and I can deal with them. So how do I get started? And then when I get started, how am I going to make sure that the people in my firm don't resist this and become the reason why it fails? And then the last 2, really, these are the keys for me, and this is true for technology in general. You always want to be asking yourself, where are the quick wins? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where are the things that I can create a lot of effectiveness easily, without a lot of effort, without a lot of expense, and so forth? Because that's where you want to start. And then you also want to be paying attention to where are the significant challenges, where are the ones that the things that seem to be promising, you know, the technology seems to promise will be amazing if you just use it, but then it turns out that it's very hard to implement. The user interface is horrible. The consultant charged you too much money, and it was just a disaster. So the key with technology is to stick to the low-hanging fruit, especially in the beginning, because you're going to build up a series of wins and you get some good momentum. And definitely avoid what I call the landmines, because all it's going to take is one of those to significantly undermine your efforts. And then the last phase, which we're not really going to talk about today, in today's session, is the part where you optimize. And this is kind of an ongoing thing. So once you get started, and you build momentum, and you've got some basics in place, and things are going well, you might get to a phase where your firm is of a certain size, let's say 3 to 5 lawyers or more, and then you start to say, well, I kind of need a dedicated document management system. I'm not going to get by with a simple file naming convention, and then I also want to be able to access my files from outside the office. And when you get into this phase, this is really where you are probably going to need consultants, unless you're extremely tech savvy or have somebody in your firm who is. So this phase is a little more long-winded, has a longer trajectory, and it's pretty much an ongoing thing. You're always optimizing your paperless practice. So the first 2 are what we're going to talk about today. So first, the contemplation phase. Now, a lot of lawyers get stuck here. They just have a lot of questions, and they feel like the questions can't be answered to their satisfaction, and it's really not that hard to answer these questions. But the main one that people have, and this is the common one, is people always say, well, isn't it impossible to be totally paperless? And the answer is, yeah, that's true. It's impossible to be totally paperless. I mean, we're always going to have some paper in our lives, and having some paper is a good thing in many instances. So that's a good question, but it's got an easy answer. And basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to define what is a paperless law office by the question of whether you have any paper or not. And that's not really a good way to go about it. So the definition that there's no paper, that's not going to help you. That's impossible, and yes, that's ridiculous. The true definition, if you want a definition, is not that you're not going to have any paper whatsoever, but rather that you're just going to have less paper. So you see these people in this photo on the right, they have paper. They also have a computer open, but they don't have too much paper. They have just enough so that they can print out, read, and do what they need to do with the paper. They'll probably shred it later, and then just manages their documents in digital format. So it's not about getting rid of all paper, it's about getting rid of as much of it as you can, as much of it as you feel is appropriate. And what you're going to find is the more you get rid of paper, the more you're going to want to get rid of paper, because when you start to have a visceral, concrete understanding of what it means to have a lot less paper and to manage information in digital form as opposed to in paper form, then you start to be self-motivated. Nobody has to tell you why it's great to get rid of paper. And that's really the key. The key is to focus not so much on the definition of what it means to be paperless, because the definition isn't really that important. The key thing is, what are the benefits of being paperless? And there are many. And so I could tell you what the benefits are, but what's interesting is we surveyed about 1,500 lawyers and got significant responses back from them. And these are folks who, most of them have no paperless practice, but they're interested in it, and so they signed up for the Paperless Chase newsletter, and we asked them, just out of curiosity, what do you think the benefits of having less paper would be? Because I wanted to see, from people who hadn't done this yet, what would they identify as the major benefits? And of course, they got to pick more than just one. So the results, the top 4 results, were as follows. Number 1, they said they felt that they would be more organized and more efficient if they cut down on the amount of paper they had to manage. And that would be my number 1 benefit if I were listing them too. Number 2, they want to be able to retrieve their office files faster and not have to have secretaries scouring the halls and going into people's offices looking for files that are missing, or just finding files that got misfiled. So they want the ability to retrieve the files faster, and also to be more effective in retrieving them. And then last of the top 3, they said they wanted to be able to access their information from outside the office. So they didn't want to have to go back into the office just to get a file that they had left there if they just needed to look up some piece of information in the file. So those are the top 3 benefits. Those are for sure the ones I would have listed, and that's exactly the order in which I would have listed them. And then the last one, the 4th one, is just there so you can see how much of a drop-off there is from the top 3 to the 4th. And that was when people said less storage space. So that, less storage space is good, but these top 3 ones are the ones that people are really interested in. So let's talk about being more organized and how paper can be an impediment to that. First, paper is expensive to store. It's expensive to store in a lot of different ways. One, you have to get file cabinets or shelf space. You have to pay people to move it in and out. If you have too much paper for your office, you have to move it to an off-site storage location. So the costs of storing paper are significant, and we just accept them if we have paper, and because we've always been paying this, we haven't thought about it. But the reality is it's getting more expensive to store paper. We're creating more of it, so you're actually going against the grain of efficiency and cost effectiveness by keeping all that paper and storing it. And most of it you're storing you really don't even need, but it's too much trouble to go through it and figure out what you would actually need to store and what you don't need to store. So law firms tend to store everything. And it's time consuming to manage all of this paper, right? You have to pay people to bring the files to you, to put the files back, to move them around, to bring them to off-site storage. If you want some information that's in off-site storage, it'll take you a day or 2 to get it from there, so it's not something you can get immediately. So it's time consuming to manage all this paper. And the thing about paper is it tends to collect in unsightly piles, in unmanageable piles, because that's just kind of how we handle the paper. We gather it in a stack, and then we move it to a new stack, or if we're working on something, we put all the little paper files next to us that we might want to work on, and then we turn to something else and work on that, but we don't put the files back because we're going to turn to it tomorrow, but we don't get to it tomorrow. We don't get to it for a month. So somebody who wants to look for the file, has to go looking around offices to get it. So paper just tends to collect in clutter. And there are some people that are good at managing paper and obsessive about putting in little folders and paper clips and so forth. But enough people aren't obsessed about that eventually entropy sets in and paper degrades into clutter. Paper is also harder to organize in general. And it's harder to organize because you have to keep putting it in all these places, in these boxes and things like that, and move them around. And then you have to decide, well, this goes in this box, this goes in that box. Oh, wait, this one is going to go in this folder. And so it's just cumbersome, time-consuming to organize. And so that is another reason why paper is not your friend. Paper is also hard to move. And each of these boxes that you see, when you see a box of paper, they call it a banker's box, it can hold about 2,500 sheets of paper, between 2,000 and 2,500, but it weighs 25 pounds. So when you put 2,000 to 2,500 sheets of paper in a box, that's going to weigh 25 pounds. So that's why you have to have a dolly to move just 2 or 3 boxes of paper around, because it's really heavy and somebody can't lift 75 pounds easily. So you have to have a dolly if you're going to move 3 boxes of paper or more. And then if you want to ship it someplace, let's say to the other side of the country, those boxes of paper are going to be really expensive to ship. So there's a lot of things about paper that make it hard to move around. Paper is also extremely hard to copy. So we created these copy machines in the 1970s and 80s, and they became very prevalent in law firms. And you notice this copy machine has a thing over on the left, which is a collating tray, because when people wanted to make a set of pleadings, they had to have a collator because it saved time and made it easier for the person to, print a set of the motions and have the copier handle it. But that's a moving part, and that moving part tended to break down. So these machines are expensive. They're kind of complicated to operate, and obviously you can't just put one in everybody's office, so they tend to be in the file room. So it's hard to copy paper, right? And most lawyers these days, if they have to copy a lot, they send it to an outside service, because the outside service is much better at this than they are. But this is in contrast to a digital file. I mean, a digital file, you would just copy it, hit Command-C or Control-C, and then hit Command or Control-V, and just keep pasting it as many times as you need to. Or if you attach it to an email and send it to a bunch of recipients, effectively it's been copied as it was sent out to those recipients. So digital information, way easier to copy and move around. Paper, very hard. And it's annoying to copy paper because you have to sit there and wait for it to finish and for other people waiting in line. So it's just all around not a good thing, copying paper. Time consuming as well. So the net result of all these things is that you are a lot less organized, because it's harder to copy it, it's harder to move, it's more expensive, it tends to get cluttered. So this is why we face this organizational problem when we deal with paper. The number 2 reason that people gave for thinking that a paperless law office would be better is the idea that they could find their files faster and better if it was in digital format. And that's definitely true, because here you see the example. If you had a lot of information in paper form, you'd have to go to the right area where it is, pull the right file out, and all of that takes time. And then you have to go reverse the process to refile it to make sure that the next time you go look for it, it's back where it belongs. Whereas with digital information, you just open the file, right? You look at the file. When you're done with the file, you close it, and it goes back to where it was, or just it closes out. It's always where it was. In fact, it's where it was so that other people who might need to work with that file can then access it and work with it at the same time. So it's not like the missing original means nobody else can work. You have effectively a perfect copy. You pull your copy up, the other person pulls their copy up. Digital information is much easier to find, but it's also easier to find because instead of rifling through the papers to get to the exact document or the exact page, with digital information, if it's text-based document that you're looking at, which it generally will be, you can just type in a search request and say, show me all the documents that have this word in it. Or I think the document is in this folder, show me all the documents in this folder that have this word in it. Or let me search for the title. So there's just a whole bunch of ways that you can find digital information that you can't use with paper. And all of that makes it a lot harder to find. And obviously, if you lose track of paper and you have misfiled it and put it into the wrong file, or you know that somewhere in there is some document that could possibly help you that says something, you just can't search for paper the way you can with digital information. So all that makes it a lot harder to find. Then the third reason that people gave was the idea of being able to work outside the office, because if you have all of your information in digital form, and if you use a cloud service or connect your document management system to a cloud service, now you're able to access those files from outside the office, and you can do it in many different ways. So let's talk about that. If you wanted to, this is if you're stuck in your office, you'd have to come there to work with paper. Whereas this fellow here, he can work from home because he's got internet access, he's got access to his files via the cloud, and he's got his little personal printer there if he needs to print. But this fellow can work from home. Or you could even work from a plane, conceivably, because these days most airlines are now adding Wi-Fi and making it possible for you to access information while you're in flight. So if you're on a long flight across country or to Europe, let's say, and you had Wi-Fi, it's conceivable that you could pull a document you needed while you were on the flight, work on it, save it, and then re-upload it when you got back, or synchronize it when you got back. So that's possible. And it's even possible to work on your files if you're on a boat, because a lot of boats these days come with Wi-Fi packages. I know I was in the British Virgin Islands not too long ago with my brother who was sailing there, and they had a package and you could access your email, and I actually had to access a document to send to somebody who was upset that something that they were supposed to have asked me for but didn't until I went on vacation, they didn't have it. So I was able to send it to them using my iPhone from a boat in the Caribbean. So all of this is possible if you have your information in digital format. So that's the good stuff with paper. Now, obviously, there are some challenges with creating a paperless law office and with learning to manage things in more digital format, and we have to be realistic about those challenges. Number one, we're used to reading on paper. So that's definitely true, that if you could magically make a piece of paper appear, most people, at least people my age, maybe even a little younger, find it easier to read paper because it's not backlit, it does well in sunlight and glare. Paper is comfortable to read from. Okay, that's true. Now it is true as well that there is new technology like the technology used by Amazon and its Kindle, which is called e-ink, and that technology is not backlit and provides basically the same feeling of paper. Now, it doesn't give you the sensation of holding a flexible paper-like document in your hand and so forth, but it does not affect your eyes the way that a backlit computer screen does. So another thing with paper is that it's easier to browse. You can, if you have, the newspaper is a good example because you can kind of look at all the stories and your eye can scan around and see what you're interested in. Or if you're using the legal digest, like the West Digest, and you're using the paper form, the book form, which most people don't do anymore, you will find that if you're reading the blurbs in the digest, it's easier to kind of scan around and get a sense of how many cases fit under promissory estoppel or some subset of a legal principle that you're looking for. It's definitely easier to browse that kind of information in paper form. It's also easier to rearrange paper if for some reason you have to. So if paper gets disorganized or a bunch of different pages are disorganized and you need to put them in the proper order, if you're doing it on a computer screen with, let's say, PDF pages, it's okay if you have like one or two pages that are out of order, but if you're reordering a lot of pages in PDF format, it's going to be a pain. So paper is a lot easier to do because you can visually move everything around, separate it, look at it. It's just easier to do. It's also true. Now, those are the basic differences, I would say. Those are realistic challenges, but they're all either fixable or they don't come up that often, and they're certainly not worth staying in the paper world and not getting the benefits of being paperless. So you recognize that those things are there, you work around them when you can, you realize it's not that big of a deal usually, and you move forward. Now, the next challenge is once you accept that the benefits are great and the trade-offs aren't that difficult, and you want to move forward in your law office, yes, convincing others can be a little challenging, but it's not impossible. You have to go about it in the right way. So the main thing is to not dictate so much to people that they do it, but kind of convince them to do it. And it is also true that the more proficient people are with technology, the easier it is. So it's not that hard to convince people who are already proficient with technology or who have been well trained in the technology that they're using. And certainly people in law firms should be well trained on all of the technology they're using. And if they are, and then they're going to be more receptive to the idea, like, okay, fine, we're just going to scan all this stuff in and we're going to use PDFs. But it's the people who aren't tech proficient, who haven't been well trained, who are going to be the most resistant. So that's where you really need to think about getting a consultant to come in to do legal technology training, because that's going to help win over the people who are resistant by giving them the skills and confidence that they need to go forward. Now, there are some things that lawyers say are challenges to becoming paperless that really actually aren't challenges. One of them that you hear lawyers say is they'll say, well, I can't become paperless because the judge won't allow it. The judges where I practice don't allow me to come to court without paper. Well, that's really kind of a red herring or fake reason, or not valid reason, because again, the point is not that you have no paper whatsoever in your life. The point is you get rid of as much of it as you can, and you work around situations where if you are comfortable going to court without paper, but the judge makes you bring paper, well, then you print out the paper and you bring paper. If you're not comfortable going to court, well, you're going to print it out anyway, and it's not an issue. So there's nothing that says you can't print out paper. You're just not managing all of your paper and worrying about that something is that a paper that you have is the original, and if you lose that, it's game over. So once you know that your system is, you're managing everything in digital format, and that's the primary way you manage things, and paper is incidental, then all you're doing is printing out paper when you need it, and you're not worrying about losing key paper because the key information is in digital form. So if the judge doesn't allow paperless, doesn't matter. You go to court, and everything's fine. And I'll tell you how it works with me, or how it's worked with me, is if I'm going to court and the judge requires paper, then right before the trial or the hearing or whatever, or a couple of days before, I will print out all of the papers that I would need. So if it's a trial, it'd be all the exhibits. If it was a hearing, it'd be whatever I would need at the hearing. I print it all out in one fell swoop by pulling all the files together, merging them together in Acrobat, and printing them out. So what happens then is I get a perfectly clean set in chronological order, or in whatever order I put it in, and I just put little dividers between that, carry the box in, everything's nice and clean and neat, and I pull out the paper when I need it, and I'm very organized using paper. I didn't have to hire a paralegal or pay a paralegal to go pull out stuff together for me. I just did it myself and sent it to FedEx office, and they printed it out, and it was fine. So there are a lot of ways to do this. You could also bring a printer to court if the judge would allow you to do that, and some judges have allowed me to do that. So there's a lot of different ways you could go to court with your computer and still be super efficient and not have to deal with too much paper. But so this reason is not valid. Another one I hear is they'll say, oh, well, other lawyers will prevent me from doing this. But this is the same thing. This is, again, it's like, well, what you're saying is other lawyers are going to mail you paper or send you paper, and therefore that's going to bring your whole operation to a standstill. That's not true. They send you paper, you scan it, and you do what you have to do with it. So there are ways to get around this. This is not a valid reason. Lawyers sometimes say, well, my practice area doesn't permit it. And again, this is another variation. It's like, well, I'm a criminal defense lawyer and I have to go to court and we have to deal with paper. Okay, fine. So you have to deal with paper when you go to court, but that doesn't mean that back in your office you have to manage it as paper. Again, you can print it out when you need to, or maybe some files you have to keep in paper form, but you can definitely get rid of paper, or a lot of it, if you start working on it. So that's the key. The key is having less paper so you can be more organized. So the key is to get rid of as much of it as you can. I really don't think having a certain practice area dictates whether you can manage your office files back where you work in digital format. Then some lawyers will say, well, I can't afford to become paperless. And you're going to learn this is a completely bogus reason. It used to be more expensive. The tools that you needed, at least when I started, it was more expensive, and I couldn't have done it as a solo lawyer back in 2002. But today, the tools you need to become paperless, they're absolutely affordable. And in fact, they're the kind of tools you should probably have anyway. So regardless of whether you intend to be paperless, these are useful tools, and you would want to have one, and it's not that big of a deal. So lawyers also worry, understandably, appropriately, that there might be some ethics concerns that they should be paying attention to before they embark on this idea of creating a paperless law office. And there are definitely ethics issues. They're not an impediment, but they do require some attention. And number one is Rule 1.1, which says that lawyers are supposed to be competent. And the recent ABA 2020 ethics initiative basically amended some of the comments, or one of the comments, to Rule 1.1. And the basic message of this amendment was, look, lawyers need to pay attention to technology. So they can't put their head in the sand and say, I'm not going to pay attention to it, because some technology can be very beneficial to lawyers and can help them do a better job for their clients, can help them save money, help them be more organized and less likely to commit malpractice. So technology is a good thing if it's used appropriately, and you can't just dismiss it out of hand. And at the same time, there are risks, and obviously you have to understand what those risks are, and you have to balance the risks against the benefits. And you have to keep up with this. You can't just say, well, 4 years ago I checked all of the stuff out, and this was fine, and so I'm still doing this. Because, as we know, in the world of technology, things can change quickly, and do change quickly, as a matter of course. So the ethics folks are saying you have to keep up with this. You have to pay attention, at least keep up enough to understand how the tools you're using have been affected by these changes. So with all that as a backdrop, what a lot of lawyers will ask is they'll say, well, you know, what about wills and promissory notes? I can't just scan those and get rid of those. That's true. You cannot get rid of wills and promissory notes. You have to store those in paper form. But that's not going to be a lot of paper, right? So it's going to be very easy to organize your wills and promissory notes. So, you know, if you need to store some things in paper form, fine, you do that. The main thing you want to do when you're embarking on this process right away, before you even really start, is to create a good engagement letter. Because what's going to happen is it's going to be kind of a time warp. If you wait until you're substantially paperless to start putting in the provisions in your engagement letter that give you comfort, then that's not going to be retroactive to all the cases that you were working on that are now ready to be, they're mostly digital. So what you need to do is create all of this stuff before you start embarking on the process. So your engagement letter should make it clear to the client a couple of things. One, that you're going to scan all of the files, all the paper you get, to PDF format. And we'll talk about why PDF format is important later, but PDF format is going to be the format you want. So you're going to make it clear, I'm not keeping paper, it's going to be in PDF format, and if you got a problem with that, let me know. Number two, I'm going to destroy all the paper that I get unless you tell me that you want it, and then you have to do that in writing, and I will send it to you. Or I will say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to represent you if you require that. And this one, really, I've never had a client. I've been using this engagement letter for a long time. So has Dane Cialino. I don't think either one of us have ever had a client say, I'm sorry, you really need to keep all this paper. Clients don't care whether you keep paper. They care whether you do a good job and you have access to the information you need. So that's not usually an issue. You tell them as well that you're only going to keep these digital files for however many years you want to keep them for, but the reality is you're going to keep them for longer because it's going to be too much trouble for you to go find them. The cost of digital storage is constantly going down, so there's no reason really, unless you have to purge them for some document non-retention policy, that you would not just keep them. You can say to the client, look, at the end of the case, I'll give you the digital copy. If you give me a written request, I'll do it via digital download. In the old days, you might do it by CD-ROM, but nobody uses CD-ROMs anymore. And then you have this engagement letter in PDF format, and you say it's valid if it's in PDF format, and ideally you get them to sign it digitally and then you never even had to use a paper version of the engagement letter. So all of that totally possible, and we will give you examples of one and tell you how to get that at the end. So now you've gotten to the phase where you go, okay, fine, all my questions have been answered. I understand what the benefits are. I see how this can work well for me. I see how I can win people over. Okay, so how do I implement this process? And basically the trick is you're kind of already on the way, because most of the files you have, a lot of them, are in digital format. All of your word processing files, those are digital format. All of your email, that's digital format. So really what you're doing as you start becoming paperless is really taking what you already have and just building on that and leveraging it, right? So as I said, key, is to look for the easy wins. So go look for the low-hanging fruit, and then avoid the landmines. So one thing you can do is, wherever possible, when you're sending information out to people, sending documents and so forth, is shift from using regular mail to using email, because as we talked about, FedEx is expensive, or regular mail is expensive, making copies is expensive, whereas with email, if you can get it into a PDF format, you can either email it out that way, or you can create a link by uploading it to a service that, because if the file's too big and it wouldn't go through the regular email, you can upload it somewhere. So there's a lot of ways to send what would be several boxes of paper to somebody using the internet, and it's a lot easier, it's faster, it's easier to send to multiple recipients and so forth. So that's one you can do. Another one that you can do, it's low-hanging fruit, is to shift from regular faxing to web-based faxing. So instead of having a fax machine that requires constant power, that's located in a particular room in your office, that has to make sure that the paper is loaded in, that can't malfunction, they can't receive two fax simultaneously, you switch that machine to a web-based fax service, which will then deliver the faxes that would be coming to you by email. And so now here is an example of where, if you use the old system, you have to go to the office to get the faxes, or somebody has to be in the office to receive the faxes. But if you're using the new system, it comes to you via email, which means you could be on a boat in the Caribbean, or you could be anywhere, and you just pull out your smartphone, iPad, computer, and open the attachment, and you see what the fax is. So that's a no-brainer. Pretty low cost these days. I know faxing is eventually going to become obsolete, but it's not completely obsolete yet. So for lawyers who use faxing, the key is to go to email-based faxing, or sorry, web-based faxing. Then the other thing to do is to shift from printing paper out to do whatever you're doing with it, usually just read it, to wherever possible printing it to PDF. So what printing to PDF means is taking, telling the computer to take whatever output would come out of the printer, and instead of making that paper, to create a PDF like that. So if you have a Word document that's 100 pages long, instead of printing it out to scan it in or do whatever you do with it, you would just say, no, print that to a PDF. And if it's a letter that you need to send to opposing counsel, so you'd say, oh, well, I'm going to send this letter to opposing counsel because this isn't the kind of thing that I want to send by email, I want it to be a letter, you could just make it into a PDF, and it would be color, you could put your signature on it. Then you could email it to the opposing counsel or to whoever you're emailing it to and say, here's my letter, print it out if you want to. I'm not going to mail it to you unless for some reason you need me to mail it to you, which they wouldn't, because they probably have a printer and can print it out. So you just start shifting in that direction, and you're going to find that most people will accept a PDF letter. So you just start learning how to use PDFs and moving in that direction. Now the key is, with all this, is that you're going to have to learn how to do more with PDFs than just view them. You're going to have software that lets you create these PDFs by printing to PDF and then doing other things with PDFs that you're going to want to do. And that means that you're going to have to get some version of Adobe Acrobat. Adobe Acrobat is software available from Adobe that comes in two versions, for Windows users at least. Mac users can only get the professional version, but if you're a Windows user, you can get either professional or standard. There's about a $100 difference, and that's the program that you want to use to manipulate PDFs and so forth. And this is the first thing you're going to have to buy, but this is the kind of thing that most lawyers should own anyway, because if you practice at all in federal court, you have to e-file. And if you have to e-file, it means you have to create PDFs from your Word documents. To do that, you need some kind of program like Acrobat. You're probably going to want to do a bunch of other things to these PDFs you create. So investing in Acrobat is totally worth it. And while it seems expensive, it's really not when you learn all the things it can do, which we will be talking about. One of the ways you can learn all the things you can do with Acrobat is to go to the site pdfforlawyers.com, where there's a lot of free information that tells you what Acrobat can do, what you might want to think about doing with it, and then how to do it. So that's some free information you can get. And then also the book that I wrote about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, called Adobe Acrobat in 1 Hour for Lawyers, which is a 160-page book, completely easily digestible, but it's more of a reference manual, I guess. It has a lot of color screenshots, over 100, to show you exactly how to do things with Adobe Acrobat. That's a very useful book for any lawyer who wants to use Acrobat. When those lawyers who some folks think are going to prevent them from being paperless send them paper, or when you encounter paper, obviously you have to make it into a PDF or to a digital file some kind of way. The way that you do this is you get the only law firm scanner that I ever recommend. Fujitsu makes several versions of their ScanSnap model. This is the top-end model, the IX500, which will scan 50 pages at a time. It's got an automatic document feeder that holds 50 pages. It'll scan the front and back simultaneously, so if you have text on both sides, it'll get it in one pass. It will scan letter and legal. It will scan irregular paper. It'll scan business cards. It'll scan color. It'll auto-detect color. It'll detect what the page is upside down and flip it around. So this is an amazing scanner, and it's about $400, and it comes with Adobe Acrobat standard. So you could actually kill two birds with one stone by getting this scanner, and it'll come with Adobe Acrobat if you're a Windows user. If you're a Mac user, it doesn't. But this is the scanner you want to get. Now, what about hiring consultants in this initial phase where you are thinking about going paperless? And the answer is, I would say in the beginning, in the early stages, for all this easy stuff we talked about, you don't really need to hire a consultant. You would if you have people in your office who are going to resist because they don't really feel comfortable with technology. Then you'd want to get a legal technology trainer to come in. But if you just have one or two people, you're pretty adept with technology. Installing the scanner is easy. Learning how to use PDFs and Acrobat is easy. Learning how to set up web-based faxing is pretty easy. So that's not the hard part. Now, it is helpful to have a consultant for what I call digital hygiene, which is the other thing about computers is that they're always needing updated software. They need patches. If you patch one piece of software, then that might cause problems with the other one. So you're always having to tweak things and make sure security patches are installed, and basically get training and the patches. Those are key. So if you're not good at that, you're not good at doing backup, then it's going to be important for you to get a consultant in to help you do that. Now, as I mentioned, we're not going to talk about the optimization phase and the part where if you grow to have 3 to 5 lawyers, then it's going to be kind of hard to manage your files by putting them in a shared folder and giving, and creating subfolders for the client names, and then creating a document naming convention, because all it's going to take is one person who misfiles something or accidentally deletes something, and you're going to start to see chaos, especially if people aren't that tech savvy. So at some point you get to the size in your firm where you need to have a centralized document management system, which is something that it's installed, and then it takes over all the save functions of all the major software you use, so that you're not able to save a Word document wherever you want. You have to go through this document management system, and for that, you're going to need a consultant to install it, and it's going to be a little more expensive. But that's going to be a necessary ingredient once your firm gets to a certain size. So the question about what will all this cost is basically not that much. The ScanSnap is $409 on Amazon. Acrobat Professional is, let's say, $413. It varies. Again, I'm getting the prices from Amazon. If you get Adobe Acrobat Standard, or if you're happy using just that, then that's going to come with the scan snap, and if you have Windows, you won't have to pay extra for that. So if you have a Windows computer and you don't need professional, then you're just going to pay $400. If you're on a Mac, you're going to have to pay $413. The professional version of Acrobat does Bates stamping, Bates numbering, and also does redaction, where it will sanitize sensitive parts of a document so that people can't read them. So those are useful functions, but not every person in a law office needs that. You probably just need one version of Acrobat Professional in each law office, unless it gets to be a fairly big law office. The book Acrobat for Lawyers is $50, PDF for Lawyers free, Paperless Chase free. So really, the resources that you would need to get started are not that significant. You need to learn how to use PDFs, you need to scan, you need to be able to manipulate PDFs, and that's basically it. The optimization we will talk about next time, because there's a lot to say about that, but in general, as I mentioned, that's the phase where you are tweaking your workflows. You're figuring out, okay, I'm kind of good at this. I got the PDF thing down. I know how to open them. I know how to look at them. I know how to Bates number PDFs. I know how to do things with PDFs. But I'm working with other people, and we need to work on our workflows to make sure that we're able to collaborate more effectively. Or we have new employees. How do we bring those people in? All that optimization stuff happens in a more mature phase of being paperless, and that's really, I think, what a lot of lawyers think is going to be the hard part. And it's really not the hard part. Really, there is no hard part if you do it properly. The hard part is if you do the wrong thing too quickly. So if you obsess about having a DMS before you need one, you're going to say, oh my God, this is too expensive. If you try to tackle things too quickly, that's going to be a problem. If you try to get rid of all paper overnight, that's going to be a problem. But if you just take it slowly, steadily, pick one case to start with and go, okay, this case, which just started yesterday, is going to be the one we use as the test balloon. We're going to learn how to scan. We're going to learn how to do web faxing. We're going to use this one as kind of our trial balloon to see how things work. You get good at that case, then you take the next case, then you do the next case. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 cases, you're going to have a system down, people are going to know what to do, and it's not going to be that hard. That's the way to ramp up a paperless law office. So the other thing is, if you want to get these key things, if you go to paperlesschase.com, there's a button you can click there, and you will get, you'll sign up for the email newsletter, which is free, which comes out once a month with useful tips and things about how to use technology in a law office setting. But you'll also immediately get a one-page PDF, of course, that gives you the 5 key steps to creating a paperless law office. And I talked about all of them today, and there are links in that document, for example, to an engagement letter. That is the provisions of the engagement letter, which are the ones that Dane Cialino uses in his for his clients. So since he's a legal ethics expert, I figure that's probably a pretty good model to work from. There's a lot of good stuff in that one-page PDF. So click there, you get that stuff, and you're off to the races. That's what it looks like. That's what you will get delivered to you. So with that, I will say thank you all very much for paying attention. I hope that answered all of your questions about how to create a paperless law office. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, ernie@paperlesschase.com, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you all very much for attending.